I'm going to invite questions and comments from you.
Thank you. Mr. Dong Hai has kind of shared with us the situation in Vietnam, where the subject teachers, of science and math cannot teach in English. And of course, the teachers of English, pure English, cannot teach those things because they don't have knowledge of math and science to teach. That's the problem in Vietnam, and that's the problem when we introduce the Cambridge program into the public schools in Vietnam. I'd like to ask the panelists, Ms. Carrie and Ms. Dong Lee, can you share with us your experience in Indonesia and in China? What happens there? Do the teachers of English, what kind of teachers, what nationalities do you have? Your teachers, the Chinese teachers, do they teach math and science and English? Do you train them, or do you have to invite expat teachers to your country to teach science and math and English? I hope that is clear, right?
Yeah, okay. But for history, geography, psychology, and history, the teaching only done by expatriate staff. So because China, I think when we run the program back to 7 or 8 years' time, it's very difficult to find qualified bilingual teachers. But nowadays, because the English teaching in China improved quite a lot, so which means many fresh graduates, that English level is quite good. So we do have, for instance, this year, we have a large number of applicants to our school for teaching positions. Normally, we do a demo lesson in English, so the English level for subject teachers, even math teachers, are relatively good. But it's a teaching pedagogy that needs to improve further on. But normally, that's why through professional development and also by lesson observation, we do have expatriate staff to teaching math as well. So every subject, we do have expatriate staff, but also have local staff for math and science and English. Yeah, thank you.
We started out in a similar way in 1999, but almost immediately we started to bring in national teachers, and we used the foreign teachers, the international teachers, to help train the national staff. And we continue to do that. So we developed an in-house training program for national teachers. Now in 2013, it's a very, very strong group of individuals. We have probably 18 national staff. 9 of those, I believe, have recently been awarded the diploma for teachers trainers from Cambridge. They chose to take that qualification because they wanted to challenge themselves in areas of assessment and evaluation. Many of them have the opportunity to go teach elsewhere. They stay in India because they want to be part of developing education there. So their next move is to work with our director now in putting together a teacher training support unit, which they'll draw heavily on the Cambridge material. They work closely with DIGNAS, the national officials, in looking for overlap in curriculum, and they've gotten into curriculum planning. They, again, see it as an exciting time in their country, as you would in China or in... Okay? But as I said in my presentation, it all comes back to the teachers and developing that motivation for them to believe that they're part of the local fabric and the future of their own education has really been key within our unit. And it's just taken off in the last 4 or 5 years. It's gotten really exciting for them.
My school is not using bilingual, in fact, and we are using purely English. I just wonder, I would like to ask Carrie, for primary, probably the teacher might be able to cope with the content. But for secondary, are the teachers able to do that? I mean, because local teachers who are really trained for English, but are they able to cope with the content of the lessons itself? Because purely, especially in Indonesia, when we learn English, we don't really expose much to other subjects. So, yeah, whether are they competent enough to teach secondary for that? And then for Dr. Lee, how do you conduct this bilingual system? Is those two teachers, are they both teaching at the same time, like translating the other teacher? Are the local teachers translating? Or are you conducting the lesson in English and this local teacher is just approaching those who are not able to cope with the English language in the learning?
In terms of delivering high school content, it is challenging for them. Again, we took a very long time in planning. It was a slow development. We kept small classroom sizes to give the teachers time to develop their skills. They love what they're doing, so they tend to stay with the project, and they have over time. Our geography teacher has developed her sense of content, not only in the Indonesian curriculum, but as well as the international curriculum. Without sounding like, I'm a Cambridge, it's because they have been helpful. They have a number of support, little books for teachers that our teachers have used that help them with the content, and then they work collaboratively amongst themselves. We manage to find the support that they need. Geography and history is a difficult subject to teach at the high school level. Math and science as well, but there seems to be a lot more support. History, nobody takes that seriously. And it's really tough. But we do at our school, and they've developed ways of supporting themselves, challenging themselves. They think critically. And again, if they're not sure, they use the internet, and then they'll go to the teachers' meetings and decide whether or not to move forward on that.
Okay. So the second question is about how this expatriate staff and local staff cooperatively teaching together. So the reasons we have a local staff is not for the translation. It's not a teaching assistant. It's equally valued as a teacher. So the reason we have a local staff in the schools like us is because the majority of our student body are Chinese. And Chinese student, I think, is very much like the Vietnam student. They've been raised in a very different way. And if you use a totally westernized way to manage the student, I think it's not appropriate. And also, we do have Chinese parents needs to be communicated with. So the Chinese staff, that task is mainly communicating with parents and also do the pastoral care to the student. And also, in order to do two things well, there must be a qualified teacher. So all the teachers in our school, local staff, they are competent bilingual teachers. Yeah. Now, teaching bilingually, because I missed the second part of my slide. Currently, we have like a one preparation year, an AS year, an AT year, because it was a Cambridge school. So when the student finish the compulsory education in Chinese system, so many of them have a reasonable level of English to start with, but not very good. So in the first year, every subject, apart from history, psychology, like social arts, art and design, is purely taught by expatriate staff. Many other subjects are taught by two subject teachers. The reasons being, we ask our local staff for the new student use bilingual language. All the presentations is English. Main language is in English, but if you want to explain certain concept, if the student have difficulty to understand, you can use Chinese as well. That's how I did it in the first year. But the second year onwards is all English. Yeah.
Just to add, at our secondary program, it's leveled. So we have students, some of the students that have come through primary are near native speakers, and they're illiterate in both Indonesian and English. So it's creative planning in terms of curriculum, and that's where the project block gives them a lot of options. Equally, we have students that are coming into the program who are at beginner level English. Because our program is integrated with the national curriculum at the high school level, they can choose the language that they prefer. And the teachers are very well trained in, they know what content language, which registers they're supposed to be delivering. Like it's too complicated for one person. I really admire the work that they do, and it's amazing to go into the classrooms and see them doing that. And they brainstorm with each other in other areas. And it's a culture within the school. They want to speak bilingually. The students want to be able to speak English as well as Bahasa, and the teachers equally so. And so that's sort of just where we've arrived at. So instead of even saying we're immersion, I don't know what to call us anymore. It's bilingual. It's really quite fascinating, and they're doing really well on exams. It's incredible. Some of the exam results. So we're now going to extend the program. We've got a strong teacher base, so we're hoping that there's a snowball effect. We have a teacher training program, and the national teachers, our Indonesian teachers, are prepared to be able to deliver teacher training in both English and Bahasa. So that sort of, I hope, answers your question a little bit.
All right. Do you also encounter some problems like we did previously? We tried with our kids, and then they got confused because we are speaking in two languages, and then when we ask questions, they are sort of ask what language should I use to answer you, like something like that, So it takes some time for them to digest the question first, and then they try to translate in their mind, and it takes time for them to do that. And do you encounter that kind of problem as well? And then when we are speaking in both languages, we found that our kids also pick up some these two languages in their sentences, and it turns out that their language is also not grammatically correct, and they are speaking in broken English. So how would you, are you encountering the same kind of problem, and how do you solve this? Yeah. How do you make them, competent enough in the subjects, but also competent in English?
It's planning. I can't say that word enough. It's planning and getting all of the teachers and the school involved. It's a whole school plan. We have Canada's been really good at putting together language documents that we use. We use electronic data collection for the teachers. Teachers have to learn how to do it that way so we can track learning. They brainstorm, they come in collectively as a group, and they pull from the documents what grammatical structures the students need to know for this particular level. Okay? They need to know what phrases they need for particular content areas. Okay? And we make sure we check that through the project blocks, so they'll decide each semester what project they're going to do, what the language requirements are, what the content requirements are. Okay? And then they jot it down. They give us the challenge of finding the material for them. Okay? And we get the material going, and then they'll do that. But it's through the planning of that and giving the students, some students are ready to do more talking in English. Some of them are still preferring Bahasa. And the teacher is just their one-on-one, aware of that, and work with the students to pull them forward linguistically. Whether it's in Bahasa, sometimes they need to develop their Bahasa more English. Training.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Hai. So you say that the teachers will attend the courses in your center for 9 months, right? What about their level of English? Do you think that after 9 months and attending 3 courses, the English is good enough in order to deliver maths and sciences in English? And how you go to assess their level of English by the end of the course? And how successful have you been with the courses?
Okay, for the current courses at NSZ, our requirement for incoming teachers is equivalent to level B of the national certificate. We don't put a high standard for teachers coming to our classes, but instead we put a high requirement for them to leave the course. You know, everyone who wants to take the courses can take the course. But we have very strict policy for getting a certificate. We divide the courses into 3 levels, like level A for 3 months, then level B, and then level C, for 3 months. And in each level, we have a midterm exam and a final exam. And in each exam, the learner have to take a written exam as well as a speaking session and a teaching session. So we assess their written skill, speaking skill, and lesson planning skill, teaching skills also. So we asked them to spend time working on their homework at home. But the fact is, because they were very busy with their schoolwork, they usually do not do homework before coming to class, and that affects the quality of the courses a lot. The total hours of the courses is more than 200 hours of coursework, and we require them to spend the same amount of time outside of the class, but in fact they don't, because they are very busy with their regular coursework. So far we have trained for more than 100 teachers of math, physics, and chemistry and biology, and we have graduated for 8 teachers in physics, and among them about 3 or 4 teachers are very good and can go directly to high school to provide lectures in English. But the other 4 still get the certificates, but at a lower level. I mean, they can attend workshop like this. They can understand what we're discussing, but to give a lecture, they have to study more to improve their skills.
So I was wondering how you managed to ensure that both the languages have equal worth and are given equal value within your institution. Just thinking about what Dr. Nguyen said earlier about how some Vietnamese teachers, and probably quite rightly, feel it's an imposition in that they may have to learn English, and they may be very experienced Vietnamese teachers and very qualified. So I suppose my question revolves around power relations, in the sense that the global dominance of England is often then reflected in international schools. So firstly, how the 2 languages given equal value, and secondly, as the students progress through their education, what kind of room can be given within the curriculum to allow them to evaluate or critique the role that English is playing within their own lives and also globally, and why is it that they're becoming bilingual? And because predominantly what we're talking about is becoming bilingual in a language plus English. So I was just wondering, within your institutions, how you're able to deal with those issues, or if you think they're issues at all. Thank you.
The situation in every organization is different. So for instance, in the schools like us in China, so all the students actually before they attend our school, they've been taught in Chinese alone, Chinese language alone. So that Chinese is a native language, is good enough for them to study, to have a life in China, to work in China. But this period of time with our school, well, Cambridge school, 3 or 4 years time, so the priority task is to improve the English. So the English is not good enough. So which means that every time I think English is very important, and your English never be good enough in our school. Doesn't mean Chinese is not important. It's just for this period of time, you should emphasize on English learning. Yeah.
We have had to address that straight on. I was in Egypt before I went to Indonesia, And in Egypt in early 2000, there were some cultural issues. Indonesia is a different experience for me. They're newer in their development. And things have changed, and presenting language in the classroom is important. And utilizing as much as possible a national staff and developing the staff in English themselves is much more effective at making sure that you're not creating issues that you shouldn't have to be involved in. And let me clarify that just a little bit. The Indonesian teachers in our school, they're developing what they call Indonesian English. And it's their cultural English. And they don't see English as English, they see it as an international language. So they're learning the language not necessarily to learn English, but to be able to be part of a global situation. And they see themselves as global citizens. So though we use the term English, we don't use it in the same way. And we really encourage their own dialect. And that's one of the nice things about developing the national staff as English teachers and then again as content teachers, because they do have their own dialect. My husband's from England and he speaks English, but I don't understand what he says a lot of times. And we can go to England and we can go to Canada and we can go to America, and there's this different flavor of English. And one of the really lovely things for me to experience, different than what was going on in Egypt, is in Indonesia, they have their own Indonesian dialect. So it is something that, they're really looking into recently. I read as much on it as possible to make sure that we're not teaching them English, but more a global language.
You mean to make the student be aware of English?
Yeah, language.
Well, actually, in Vietnam, most of the students now are aware of learning English as an international language. As I say, English now is not just the language of the country of England, but an international language. So most of the students are aware of that. But besides that, I think there's a large percentage of students who are not liking to study English. And I'm currently teaching in high school, and there's an interesting thing is that the students in this high school that I'm teaching are not interested in learning English from the English teacher. But they always ask me to teach them physics in English, because I think there's some problem with the English curriculum in Vietnam high schools. It seems more like teaching them to be a linguistic rather than a user of English. So that makes them feel bored of English, but they want to use to learn the English that they can use to talk with their friends, to listen to radios, things like that. Okay.
Thank you. I have one final challenge to each of our three panelists, which is to respond to a question that Peter raised this morning, where he said that speaking with teachers worldwide, they all told him it's a lot of work to do bilingual education, and he responded by saying, well, why bother? So I'm going to ask this question to each of you. Why bother? And I hope that perhaps, and this is my challenge, you can come up with a one-sentence answer to the question, why bother with bilingual education? Why do you go to the trouble of implementing bilingual education? Is it worth it? Why?
Since as a Cambridge school, I think we have to, because we have no other choices to use our Chinese language to teach A-level. Otherwise, our students wouldn't pass A-level exam. Well, so apparently, I think the good things, like I mentioned, since I think the situation in Vietnam is very similar to the situations in China back to 4 or 5 years ago. We set up because it's the first Cambridge Center in Shanghai. Even Shanghai is a very international city. The first one actually is at the end of 2005. It's just about 7 to 8 years back then. And at that time, the parents are very, very reluctant to send the daughter or son to the schools like us because they do not trust the school like our school can give their son or daughter a better education later on. They don't trust this kind of program very much. But now, as several years passed, you see the son or daughter, they can get through A-level, they can get a much better universities than they could get in the local Chinese school. So which means gradually the Cambridge schools in China nowadays is very popular. So I can see all the students attend the Cambridge International School, also a majority of the students attend Cambridge International School. They can attend a much better universities than they would do in the local curriculum. So that's why there's a need for the bilingual education in China at the moment.
I think for myself, I start with the opposite of bilingualism, which is monolingualism. And in a world that's become so small, that would be very boring. So the thing with bilingualism, and why stop with multilingualism, I think it respects the heart and the core, the soul of the people who are involved in the development. That's been our experience in Indonesia. Language is attached to our culture and vice versa. So I think it just gives people an opportunity to experience the whole world and yet maintain who they are.
Well, I think all of you are here for the bilingual education seminar, so I guess each of you have the answer why bilingual education is important. But for me, I can say that when we mention bilingual education, and specifically when we talk about the Cambridge curriculum, we are talking about learning in English, and why English is important. This is a very obvious question. Nowadays, English is international language, and as Carrie said, the world is become smaller and smaller, and students have to go beyond their country to work, to study, and to see the world. So to prepare them not only just the scientific knowledge, but also the language and cultural knowledge is very important. I myself have seen a situation last summer. There was a Vietnamese high school student who had traveled abroad to study and then came back to visit his family last summer. And during his 8-week visit to Vietnam, his mother came to find me and asked me to teach them a very intensive course on English for sciences, because he didn't understand what his professors in America was talking about. So he entered university, and then he recognized that his English was not good enough to study in that environment. So he ran back to Vietnam and looked for teachers who can train him with that. So I think learning English is not just learning a language, but it is a tool to access the knowledge of the world. Okay.
Before we come to the concluding remarks, I would like you to join me in a round of applause and thank you to our panelists.